Hello everyone, welcome to Straight Talks F1. Now last year Lewis Hamilton said that he had never cried after winning a race. It was after winning the British Grand Prix in Silverstone. And yes, that was a win that broke his drought 945 days since his last win in Saudi Arabia in 2021. So it made sense why he cried, but that wasn't the first time Lewis Hamilton got emotional and shed tears after winning a race. He either forgot about 2020, the Turkish Grand Prix, or was just typically over dramatic about ending that win drought. That Turkish Grand Prix in that curtailed 2020 season, it was an all-timer race. Probably the best of that season besides the second Bahrain race, the Sakir Grand Prix. This Turkish Grand Prix, it came after the boring run of Hamilton and Mercedes wins, dominant race wins in Germany, in Portugal, in Imola, and in Turkey as well. Hamilton won. It was the same result. So you may ask, how is it different and exciting, and why is this race special? Firstly, Hamilton secured his 7th World Championship, and secondly, the chaos that unfolded before Hamilton won, it was beyond anyone's imagination. Nobody would have thought a race like that, a race weekend like that, could happen in Istanbul. Firstly, no one thought that Istanbul could host a race in F1 after a long time. But that pandemic curtailed season forced F1 to bring back these old venues like Istanbul, and it produced a banger of a race. Hamilton obviously having the best moment of his career, arguably taking that record equaling 7th World Championship. But it wasn't as straightforward as the race classification and the result make it seem. Now, to give a quick summary of what had happened in the season before, Hamilton had dominated all races barring couple of them in Silverstone and in Austria. He was cruising to the title. Valtteri Bottas, his teammate, he was the main championship challenger for Hamilton, but he was way behind in the standings, courtesy of not winning races after his first race win in Austria. It was just never going to be. Heading into Turkey, Hamilton had an 85-point lead and a chance to secure the championship. But as I said, it wasn't going to be straightforward. The Istanbul Park track had been resurfaced, and on top of that, rain came down. So basically, the Istanbul track had become an ice skating rink. Be it Bottas and many other drivers, they did not like that rink at all. Those were extremely wet and slippery conditions, and they were not able to keep their cars on track, consistently spinning and going off track. It was horrible, and Mercedes themselves were struggling. The impeccable W11 had lost its edge in Istanbul, maybe. Hamilton was struggling to match up the top times. Throughout those free practice sessions and qualifying, Hamilton and Bottas were nowhere near pole position. The Mercedes had been locking out front rows. They were on top of every qualifying session, taking 1-2 finishes in the races. So this was a novel experience to see Mercedes struggle, and that W11, which was an extremely impeccable car. But in Turkey, it wasn't able to switch on its tires, which is why Hamilton and Bottas were not up to the pace. So, with Mercedes not being on top, who was leading the pack, you would ask, right? The obvious answer, Max Verstappen and Red Bull. They were there and thereabouts, despite the treacherous and challenging conditions. But they had one more team for company on top. There was Racing Point with Sergio Perez and Lance Stroll. Now, Racing Point was going to become Aston Martin in 2021, but they had a chance to register their first race win before that change happened. In the underdog guise of being Force India and Racing Point, they had been underdogs in the midfield for several years, and that 2020 season gave them a chance to be amongst the top teams. With a superb car, which was allegedly a copy of the 2019 Mercedes, Regardless, it was a superb car, and Perez and Stroll were right in the mix for the win in Turkey. And Turkey could have been it for them. That could have been their first race win, and Lance Stroll could have become a Grand Prix winner. He was leading their charge, and Perez was also in the mix, but in an obviously crazy qualifying session, it was Stroll who put it on pole. Both the Racing Point cars did extremely well. They put on the intermediate tires, put on the fastest lap times to beat Max Verstappen to take pole. Verstappen was set to take pole with no Mercedes up front. He was untouchable throughout that qualifying session. Everyone was in extreme wet tires. The conditions were so challenging, the gap between two drivers was almost 2 seconds at times. But towards the end of Q3, the track started to dry out, and Stroll and Perez put on the intermediate tires and went to the top of the timesheets. First, it was Perez. He was the one who stimulated people to go out on the intermediate tires. Verstappen stayed on the wets, which proved to be a wrong decision, but it was a 50-50 call to take on the inters. Now, in the final minute of the session, it was Perez on pole, Verstappen was second, and then came Lance Stroll to put on the huge shocker, taking pole on the last lap on intermediate tires. Verstappen tried his best to retake pole, but he fell short by 0.3 of a second. And Lance Stroll, the Canadian driver for Racing Point, was on pole position in Istanbul. Nobody could have believed that a Racing Point of all teams could get a 1-3 on the grid for the Turkish Grand Prix. Could have been Stroll's first race win, could have been Racing Point's first victory, but it just wasn't going to be that weekend. Now, Hamilton had only qualified in 6th, so he obviously had a task at hand. As per the equation, he needed to finish at least second to win the championship, but that was if Bottas won the race. What helped him was Bottas never looked like scoring points in Istanbul. He was struggling badly, spinning out, going off track. He was outside the top 10, and it just wasn't possible that Bottas would score points to keep the title battle alive. Those were treacherous conditions, and Hamilton obviously knows how to navigate a wet track like that. Still, even with a normal points finish, Hamilton could have become world champion. He had an 85-point lead. All he needed was a P6 or a P7 finish, which is where he was going to start the race. But he did make a spectacular comeback. And it was crucial as well, because to win your 7th world championship by winning the race coming from 6th on the grid on a wet track is just something that is going to make headlines. It is the best way to have a big moment like this. And Hamilton did ensure that he secured his 7th world championship in some style. The Racing Points, they were there up top trying to fend off their lead from Verstappen, and many would have thought that Verstappen would eventually win this race. But unfortunately, Verstappen spun out while trying to chase Perez, and that was the undoing of his race. He was basically out of the contention for the win, and then the pole sitter, he dropped back due to a wrongly timed pit stop. Racing Point were confused, went to pit Stroll for new intermediate tires. They waited a bit too long, and when Stroll came out, he lost track position and he just wasn't able to switch on those tires to get back in front. He just never recovered from down in 8th and 9th. At this stage, Perez was basically leading on worn out intermediate tires, and Hamilton pursued him to take that effective lead before Stroll pitted basically. He was on similar tires to Perez, but the Mercedes W11 versus the Racing Point RP20, it was always going to be the W11 that prevailed. And it was amazing to see the number 44 driver pull off that sort of a performance to secure his 7th world title. when his teammate was nowhere, when Mercedes did not have a car with the impeccable dominant edge that they had throughout that season. It was amazing, it was commendable, and an obviously heavily emotional moment for Hamilton. Winning that record equaling 7th world title, equaling Schumacher's record. Nobody could say that Hamilton was a lesser driver than Schumacher after the 2020 Turkish Grand Prix. The tears that Hamilton shed, the raw emotions on the radio while he was talking to his engineer Peter Bonington. It was a moment where Hamilton deserved all the spotlight, all the credit, and the respect that he got right after the race ended. His rival and friend Sebastian Vettel, he comes to him congratulating him for a 7th world title. Obviously, Vettel understood the emotional weight of that moment. It was quite beautiful to see Vettel congratulating Hamilton, and Vettel himself had an awesome race in Turkey to back up Hamilton's title triumph and celebrations. Vettel ensured he joined on the podium on the last lap itself. Now, Hamilton had taken the race win by over 20-25 seconds. So, his advantage ahead of Sergio Perez, who was in second place, basically gave time for that podium battle behind him to marinate and take the spotlight. On the last lap at that W section of Istanbul Park, it was pure racing excellence and chaos from Perez, Vettel, and Leclerc. The Ferraris they had been doing well, putting on new intermediate tires towards the second half of the race and climbing back to the podium places. Leclerc, in fact, was looking superb. He got past Vettel and he attempted a move on Perez to take P2. This is where it all unfolded badly for Leclerc. He should not have gone for that move because he went deep into the corner and that allowed Vettel and Perez to pass through and take both the podium places. Could not afford going deep at that corner. He was frustrated that he had the podium in the grasp but just gave it away to his teammate by going for one place too many on Perez. And it was damn cool to see Sebastian Vettel back on the podium after what had been a horrible season. His final one with Ferrari. That was a redemption moment for Vettel, and he had a superb Grand Prix in Istanbul. The opening lap that he had, it was mind-boggling. Vettel gained so many places on the opening lap, starting from 12th on the grid. That was Vettel showing his class in the wet conditions. Istanbul was obviously a track he knew from his days back in the 2000s, so that would have helped him. But to show his class on a track where everyone else was spinning in those wet and treacherous conditions, it was an underrated moment, I would say. Many people recall the "Here Comes Sebastian Vettel" moment from Belgium 2018, but Turkey 2020, Vettel's opening lap charge and the last lap podium move on Leclerc. Like he almost got Perez as well at the line. Could have been second place right behind Hamilton. And if it was one more lap, he would have definitely got second place. But who knows, that could have also got back Leclerc into play. So yes, Hamilton securing the 7th World Championship, that was definitely one of the best moments of the season and the peak moment of the Turkish Grand Prix. But Vettel, Leclerc and Perez's last lap tussle, that will always go down in history as an awesome moment that doesn't get talked about enough. Overall, the Turkish Grand Prix in 2020 wasn't all about Hamilton's 7th world title. Yes, that stole all the headlines, but there were so many events that happened, so many aspects to it. Lance Stroll could have won that race, Sergio Perez could have won that race, Verstappen definitely should have won that race. On pure merit, in terms of the pecking order, it should have been Max Verstappen on top of that podium. But Hamilton was destined to win that race and take his 7th world title in style. So that's all from my end in this episode. I wanted to revisit the 2020 Turkish Grand Prix for a long time. It's an epic and awesome race. It's a race that maybe doesn't get enough credit or may just fade away from people's memories later on in the future. But Turkey 2020, Hamilton crying after winning his seventh world title, and all the subplots that unfolded leading up to that crowning moment. With Hamilton now moving to Ferrari, gunning for his eighth world title, it will be 5 years to this moment on 15 November 2025. Will Hamilton be a 8-time world champion by then? Or a few weeks after that? We'll see. For now, that's all from my end. Arigato and stay tuned until next time.